Thank you all for coming. My notes are a mess, so sorry. I have to speak extemporaneously anyway. Oh, and by the way, if my grammar is messed up, please don't tell my dad.
She's a Fulbright scholar.
So, my brother and I welcome you to the celebration of our father's life. We would like to thank Mike Borders, Ann Williamson, Jill Cox, and the volunteers from the Ojai Valley Tennis Club for making this possible. We also thank AZ Music Services for making sure we can all be heard, even me. Briefly, we are here at Court 1 as the most fitting place to remember my dad. He began playing on these tennis courts after showing up in Ojai in 1959, I think, on a whim and the casual advice of a friend to make the detour on his way to San Francisco and Stanford, which is where he was headed. He was drinking a beer or something and started chatting with the couple next to him. They turned out to be Mr. and Mrs. Burr, who I remember, headmaster and mistress of Ojai Valley School. They offered him a job on the spot, as he said, and the rest was history. Ojai and Higgins Lake in Michigan were his spiritual and physical homes for the rest of his life. So he played on these courts from the get-go. Russ Sperry, who's here, I don't see him, remembers from the very beginning. Hopefully he'll share with that later. During my childhood, I'd roam around in this park watching him play tennis and climbing trees until he was done. And he would retire with his buddies to the bar across the street, and I can't remember what it's called. The Hub! Thank you. The Hub, of course. Let's see. So he played here until Carl Pope built the Ojai Valley Racquet Club at the time, now it's the Athletic Club, in, I believe, 1976. I'm not sure. Yes, here there were rackets thrown, shoelaces left untied. This was before he switched to Birkenstocks. Curses were hurled. He was my dad, and I loved him for all of it. So how many people here met him since 2000? Raise your hand. How many people met him after 1990, but before 2000? How about 1980? How about 1970? Oh, a lot of you guys.
The old guard.
And how about 1960? We got some 60s. Woo! So you guys will have to figure out who's known him the longest. I'd love to know. So, see, now my notes are a mess. Perhaps more than anything else, my father was a storyteller. He created a magical world with words, more mythological than literal. I hope many of you will share your stories today.
Michael was a very, very entertaining man because, well, not because he was trying to entertain or being funny. His stories were inherently interesting and very often funny. So I am expecting that there will be a lot of levity here and funny stories. But he had a serious side. After all, he was a professor of English literature. And I think I witnessed a very important happening to him. So I'd like to share that with you. And that was just a few days before he left Ojai for the last time. I walked into his room, and normally it's very loud with television. He loved to watch TV. It was very often tennis games, car races, Mecum car auctions, and the MSNBC, Turner Classics. All these were blasting all the time. But that time it was very quiet, and I thought he might be resting, but he wasn't. So when he saw me, he almost stood up. At that time, he could not stand up easily on his own. He had the help of a walker. but he saw me, he said, Hiroko, I'm having such a aware time. I'm so aware of this moment. And I've never experienced this kind of sensation before. So I thought that it's not a time to ask questions. What do you mean? What experience are you having? Because it dawned on me that he might be having a moment of satori. That's a Japanese word for understanding everything deeply. So it could be also interpreted as enlightenment in Zen terms. So I could not ask questions. Then he left Cher. The Cher drove him to Michigan, and about maybe 10 days later, I got a call from Bitsy, his sister, that I should be visiting him. So I did. So that was the 5 days before he passed, and he was on hospice bed, and he recognized me, and he opened up his eyes and said, oh my goodness, and he squeezed my hand. And he was trying to say something, and Bitsy was encouraging him. It's only 5 more days, Michael, to the canoe race. Only 4 more days to the canoe race. And that's the big long-distance canoe race on Osabo River. And he sponsored that also. There's a big banner at the starting point. And I'm sure he just hung on, tried to make that race that held on July 27th. The day he passed away that day. And he was trying to say something, and he would mumble something. It was not legible. We could not understand his words. But one time he said, I want bread. So I went to the kitchen and looked for the bread, but there was nothing there in terms of bread. So I took a small piece of croissant that I brought from Ficel's in Ventura. So I put that piece in his mouth, and he moved it around a couple of times, and he said, bread. So Alisa had to run to get real bread. And the following day, his words will not come, less and less frequent. And I thought he's trying to say something, and people around him, there were so many people, loving family, Bitsy, the sister, and the Rebecca, and Michael, and Lori, and Alisa, and Bitsy's daughter, Kate. They were all taking turns in vigil and caring for him. What a wonderful, wonderful family he has. In outside of Ojai, he has a wonderful life also. And so he kept trying to say something, and I can hear. We all thought that his brain was working very hard. He's trying to formulate words, just did not come. So people around him start to guess, do you want juice, ice cream? But to me, I thought he wanted to say something more. So I just remember those incidents in Ojai before he left. So I start to imagine. what he would have wanted to say. And I thought, well, first of all, he had a full life, very complete life. He lived his life the way he wanted, and very passionately. I'm sure he watched the U.S. Open today, and he loved Nadal. He loved something, he did it passionately. On the other hand, if he hated something, he passionately hated it. And that was Djokovic. And the difference, why he thought so, and that was simply their locker room behavior. And Nadal was a gentleman, according to Michael, whereas Djokovic wasn't. That was the reason for liking this and that. Anyway, I thought that he also wanted to say that he sought for truth, and that's how he dealt with his illness and eventual death. And when I accompanied him, he also asked the doctor, well, tell me the truth, doctor, how much longer have I got? But all in all, he was such a lucky person. Look, all of you just show up to show a love for him and respect. And I would say he was such a lucky man. And I'm so honored to have known him so long and so well. Thank you.
What Michael Jr. asked me to quickly say was that the other day he read something. I think that might be Senior. He wanted me to read a quote by Clarence Buddington Keelan because it reminded him of his father. The quote said, "My father didn't tell me how to live. He lived. And he let me watch him do it." And I think that all of us who know him can understand that. I wrote something for my father-in-law. You're welcome.
I'm going to put on my glass at this point, sorry.
And it's called Dancing Through Grief. A psychologist friend told Michael Jr. and me that grief is not a state. It's a country which needs to be explored. I've been exploring my grief in a way that I believe my father-in-law would be very proud through reading literature. I did. My father-in-law was an English and professor, as you know, of literature. He was known to profess upon occasion. Sometimes he would profess profanity, substituting a hand gesture here and there. Those of you who have seen our family portraits know which gestures those were. As I read this one beautiful quote, I could hear him whisper in my ear those words that those of us close to him were blessed to sometimes hear him say. Good for you. The quote I was reading said this: "You will lose someone you cannot live without. And your heart will be badly broken. And the bad news is you'll never completely get over the loss of your beloved. But this is also the good news. They live forever in your broken heart that doesn't seal back up. And you come through, and it's like having a broken leg that never heals perfectly. It still hurts when the weather gets cold, but you learn to dance with a limp. Papa Bear, we miss you. And here is to us learning to dance with a limp. Thank you."
So soon after he was diagnosed with cancer, my father-in-law had a conversation about dying. I asked him what he wanted to be remembered for. What summed up his life? As you know, he's been known for many things. He was an English professor. and a scholar of Yeats. He was an amazing storyteller, an accomplished tennis player, an avid collector of fast cars and boats. He cherished his son, Michael, and my wife, Rebecca, and was a devoted and proud grandfather to our daughters, Miranda and Anna. But what would he like to be remembered by? Without hesitation and straight from memory, he quoted a line from Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. And gladly would he learn and gladly teach. And gladly would he learn and gladly teach. I had to look it up. It's the final line of Chaucer's portrait of a professional student, a clerk who was both thin and poor and in love with books. My father-in-law had opinions about most everything. But what I most admired about him was his insatiable quest for knowledge and beauty. He taught me well, and I'll miss him greatly. Thank you.
I am playing doubles with my partner Guy, who is the most uncanny and wicked tennis player you could ever play with or against. He had a nasty spin, little serve dinky thing. And you remember it, no? We're playing tag and another dear soul, Huffman. The backstop of all backstops. Got every damn shot back. Because they just floated over, nothing too hard. So we are losing this match, and Guy just comes over and he says, and Tag's serving, he says, call the next one out. Out! Sucker mother, what? Are you kidding? What? Sucker mother. Woof! There goes the racket, sails over the thing right into the vinca. Of course, then he has to find another racket with another 10-minute delay. He gets out another racket, and there we go again. And sucker mother was his. You know, he was so brilliant on the tennis court. Really, you would never realize that he was such an athlete. Really, it was very much under the radar. You'd never really get it, but he was a hell of a tennis player. And of course, he was a cheat. He had the most wicked serve that was, well, 3 foot faults were actually quite, that was actually the smallest one. By the time he hit the ball, he was practically at the net. I actually was watching some minor championship that was going on at the club. Tag was playing, and I was just standing up there. And of course, he was playing a couple of college guys, and they were thunderously hitting the ball all over the place, completely swamping Tag, and whoever it was. It wasn't Guy this time, but anyway, it is usual, hop, boom, practically at the net when he hits the serve. And one of these college guys comes up and he goes, "Are you kidding, man? Are you kidding?" He goes, "What?" He goes, "Are you kidding? What's that, a serve? That's a foot fault." He goes, "You must have had a very unhappy childhood." Perfect response. And may I say, after that repose, these college kids went right in the tank. Now, when he first gave money to the Ojai tennis tournament, and thank God he did, because it was really reeling a bit, and, Mike had a little bit of money. When the money came, of course, the stutter left him magically. It was perfect timing. he had this huge banner made up. Mike Taggart. It was out there, over there. We thought it was a joke, you know. I mean, he had bigger billing than I ever had for Clockwork Orange. Mike Taggart, huge thing on the wall. So I went, has anybody got a Sharpie? I put underneath, Mike Taggart, available, rich, porn star, and wrote his number. So we didn't hear a word about this. And then my wife, Kelly, called the number, of course, Tag's number, and went, hello, Mike. Who is this? Who is this? She goes, I saw your number on the advertisement. Who is this? She goes, it says for a good time. And he goes, well, I have to tell you, Stotter came back, I have a very saggy scrotum. You can't make that up. So we were doing a benefit for the Oak Grove School, and I was friendly with John Lloyd, and I got a couple of his friends to come and play in a pro celebrity tournament, and Johan Krieg, who had won the Australian Open Championship, was coming, and Tag was obsessed with this, and he wanted to play, and I said, well, if you're going to play with the Johan Krieg, then that's $500. And, I could see that computing in his brain. And he goes, I'll do it. I went, sign the check. And I made him write out the check there and then on the bleachers over at the Racket Club. And so he got to play with Johan, and it was such a fun time. Tag was all excited, and we had Brian Telcher, and it was incredible. We had such a fantastic, raised a lot of money, and this guy from the Love Boat, Bernie Coppell, he was in the chair, and Tag was playing with Johan Krieg, and Johan, who's become a friend of mine, was looking at me like, woo, woo, like pointing at Tag, woo, what's this kind of thing. But he didn't say that because he was, on court. And so in the change round, I just mentioned to Bernie in the chair, Bernie, call foot fault next thing. Fault! Tag completely and utterly collapsed. Every shot then was in the net. Johan Krieg was looking at him like, hey man, what's... He came over to me in the change room, he goes, what's with the dude? He's crazy. I went, yeah, and he's still wearing his Birkenstocks. There was a funny moment. Mike Jr. was working, you were a waiter or a busboy or something at Zen Zero restaurant in Santa Monica. Mike was all pumped about this, so he got Guy and I and Kelly to come along for dinner that he was going to, put out for and all that, because it was Mike's thing, and we were going to go there. Mike was going to be there and serve us, and he was so proud of this, and it was so sweet. Yeah, right. So we go there, and Guy and I, we're all dressed up. Kelly walks into the restaurant in a red dress. She must have been 23. The whole place went silent.
Dead silent. Everyone dropped their forks. Absolutely true.
Absolutely. She was, stunning. And so Mike talked about that for the rest of his life, didn't he? Always talked about the red dress. Anyway, of course, we ordered very good wine. We had a fantastic meal, ordered the best food, because, of course, old tight-fisted there was going to be paying for it. Then, of course, the classic came. A guy goes, are you kidding? Are you kidding? He goes, just lend me, do you have a credit card, guy? Guy goes, oh, come on. I mean, this is now, we're at $700 or $800. You know. This is back in the day. It's like 3,000 now. So I went, okay, here, guy, let's split it. And you owe us both. He never, ever paid either of us back. You old cheap bastard, you. Yeah, the crow left. Good. Probably going to see the end of the game. Probably Nadal's winning, I hope. I don't know. Anyway, there's another funny story. There's so many. I know everyone's got great stories about this man. You know, you go through life, and it's a fairly mundane sort of life, that, you know, but there are occasionally characters one meets that always put a smile on your face, because there's always some outrage going on or some absolutely ludicrous story to tell. And Tag just, he drew those stories right to him, and there were so many of them. There's quite a funny one. He took a guy, of course, said to him, you know, there's the motorcycle auction in Vegas, and they're all going to go, and everyone's so happy, and Guy drove him, but Guy wanted to get back early, so he arranged for Tag to get a ride with somebody else. Now, that was very irresponsible of Guy, because he must have known that, when you tell Tag to stay there, we'll be right back, he just goes off, wanders off, and a couple of hours later, he's still looking around. That's exactly what happened. The guy drives, we're looking for Tag. He said, wait there. He's gone. Tag forgets or goes off. And so the guy comes back to Ojai. Oh. And big kerfuffle about all this going on. Tag was furious. Blamed Guy, big thing. Guy, how could you do this? We're all laughing, of course. And Tag comes into the garage that he called the museum, even though most of them were fakes. He comes in. Cheap shot, I know. Hey, I sold him one of them. So I know it was a fake.
Yeah, it's the worst one, too.
But I told him. Was it? It was a beautiful car. Wish I had it back. Anyway, I know. So he came in, though, and he goes, where is this guy? He was named Mark. I'll leave it at that. He goes, where is he? And, Tag was 78 or something. I said, where is he? I go, well, why? What do you want to see him for? He was in his 40s. He goes, because I'm going to beat the crap out of him. I went, yeah, sit down, Grandpa. Anyway, there's a couple of things here that Kathleen Rogers wanted to say. Kathleen was one of the group, along with Helen, Murph, John Hall was here, I saw. And there's a whole group, and George, that spent our youth. Well, I was 40 by the time I learned this game, so I was an old man even then. So it was so much fun. It was just the greatest thing to do in Ojai, was to go along, in the afternoon and sit in and work yourself into a set of tennis with these extraordinary characters. And then Tag brought me down here on Thursday afternoons. It was the time to play, in the park, the public, and there was crazy players in the park. A few of them. Yeah. They were fantastic, and it was always fun going with Tag. Anyway, Kathleen has this to say. A group of us would always play tennis in the afternoon on Mondays and Thursdays. One afternoon, Tag played a couple of sets on court 1, then came off the court and sat down on the deck. He complained about something in his tennis shoe. Took off his right shoe, and there was a huge dead lizard. Totally flattened in his shoe, and he just played 2 sets with it then. I'm surprised there wasn't a rattlesnake in the other one. Also, remember Tag would sometimes come to play, and instead of going to the men's locker room, he'd change right there he'd come out and change right in the view on the bench on court 1, between court 1 and 2. He would come out to the deck, and when it was his turn to play, he'd walk out to the bench and change there. One time, he turned his back to the deck, took off his jeans, and we all witnessed a huge rip in his underwear and were treated to his bare ass. Side note, he got a letter of censure about that, mooning the audience up in the bleachers. And I got one too, but mine was for bad language in front of children. I said, well, where the fuck are they? I don't care. One for me and one for Tag. And we were very proud of the fact that we got Carl Pope to actually do something. At one point in his illustrious career, Mike, the Ojai tennis tournament Mike, was asked to be a conflict resolution monitor on the private tennis courts. This is a good choice, is it not? Sure enough, the tournament desk was called, saying that one of the private courts needed help with 2 parents arguing with each other. Mike jumped in his car, drove out to the court, came back, and a while later, with a big smile on his face, and he was very proud of himself. He solved the problem by saying if they really wanted to fight, they could fight with him and they would lose.
I had volunteered for 56 consecutive years before last year. Because of my physical condition, I could not make it last year, but somehow, by myself, I drove from Somas thinking about Ojai and thinking about Mike and thinking about all you wonderful people. I've had a career at Ojai. It's been fabulous. Now, I met Mike when he first came here. And my first exposure to Mike was on a Sunday. We had a bunch of old codgers who came from all over Ventura County to play here in Ojai on center court. And I had never met Taggart before. He and I were playing doubles, and all of a sudden he made a mistake. He got so infuriated that he threw his racket in the tree. He never recovered the racket. Mike had a very tender heart. He loved the tennis community, not only in Ojai, but countywide. Mike started giving money to the tournament, to one of the sections in the men's draw. And every year, the volunteers met in Mike's garage for the pre-tournament gala. Mike was a very outgoing, personable person who loved the community. He literally loved the community, especially the tennis community. One last experience with Mike. Tracy Austin, who at that time was 17 years old, and I got in the habit, I either umpired on court 1 or court 2. When I had a serious match, I always went to Taggart and I said, Mike, I'm counting on you to call the service line. We had the biggest crowd in Ojai history. I had to chase photographers out. They literally took up the whole court. Taggart called some beautiful calls on the service line, and Taggart and I had a close tennis relationship. Mike is a very hard person to categorize. You can never tell what the guy was going to do. And I never tried to figure out what this guy is going to do. I just let him do it. It all worked out. Thank you for having this love fest for Mike Taggart. Thanks.
I had received word from Tracy Austin. She was just mentioned after the passing of Mike that Tracy wanted something to be read on her behalf. And she was a big fan of Mike Taggart's, and likewise, Mike was a big fan of Tracy's, of course. And so this is just what Tracy had to say. We were deeply saddened to hear the news of the passing of Michael Taggart, who will always be considered a true Ojai tennis legend. I remember coming up to Ojai a few years back and attending the Wednesday night open party welcoming all the players at Mike's car garage. Mike gave my family the personal tour, and I can recall how much pride he took in owning all those classic automobiles and telling the countless stories about them. In 2016, my son Brandon decided to play the men's open singles division as a high school senior, and each day it was so refreshing to see and hear Mike cheering on all the open players at the Ojai Valley Inn before moving over to Libbey Park for the finals on Sunday. Brandon made it to the finals that year, and the photos we have of Mike and the trophy ceremony with all our family will be forever cherished. By donating the open prize money each year since 2003, Mike lifted the open divisions to new heights and is part of what makes the Ojai such a classic and timeless tournament. His spirit will remain a part of the Ojai for years to come. So from the entire Holt and Austin family, I would like to extend our deepest condolences to the Taggarts at this time of loss for a true Ojai community treasure who will be dearly missed. Thank you, Steve. Thank you.
I used to refer to him as the human rain delay because he would, much like Malcolm talked about, getting his shoes on before match would be 10, 15 minutes. Changing sides would be 10 minutes. Bad line call, 15-minute argument. All this went on, and I used to kid him that he was the only player I knew, because he foot faulted so much, that he could return his own serve. And there is a famous story, we were talking about this earlier with George and Dennis and Robbie, some of the guys that used to play down here at the park, which we called slumming it. Once the racket club was built, we'd come down, and there were a few more characters down here in those days. We talked about Peccatuni, Paul Rogers, Bill Huffman, a lot of these people that have since passed. There's not too many of us older guys left. But one of the great stories we're remembering, it's been touched on a little bit, there's a tree behind us here off of Court 2 that ate one of his rackets, his shoes, his shirt, his shorts, all in the same day. So he's pretty much left with sagginess, a hole in his underwear, ripped under. I got there. I was getting there. It's all in a delivery. A hole in the underwear, and then he'd kind of shuffle off in his Birkenstocks to the hub for another day. So another little bit was he had sort of different circles of friends, right? We had the characters on this side. We had what you might refer to as upper crust on this side. And he moved easily back and forth between all those different groups. So it's just one of those Ojai characters that's going to be missed. And it's great that everybody's here to remember that. So thank you all.
From the time he got here. And he did easily move from one group of people to another. He could be out here playing tennis. He could be putting his tweed jacket with the leather patches on and spouting Chaucer and Shakespeare, whatever you want to hear. And I just wanted to say that I need somebody with a strong arm because this needs to go up in this tree. Get it up in the tree.
I don't know.
Nice.
You can do it. Yeah. Wow.
Come on, we'll get him. One more.
Throw it up there.
You can do it.
closer. Uh-oh. Hold on to him. Mike, you should be the one to throw him up.
There we go. Where do you guys want him?
They don't have enough holes in them.
As most of you know, I was Mike's right-hand man. Yep. So let me tell you how Mike and I first met and how it progressed in the short 17 years since I knew him. I worked at Bayless and Star Market for years, and my passion and sickness for cars was uncontrollable. One of my coworkers said, "Have you ever met this guy named Mike Taggart?" And I said, "No." He says, "I have to introduce you to him. It always seems you're off work and he's shopping." So when we finally met, and we started talking cars, and time was rolling along, and my wife was shopping, and she worked there too, and she was done shopping and said, "It's time to go." Then Tag says, "I hear you have Shelby cars." And I said, "Yes, I do." And then he says, "Oh my God." He says, "That's my favorite car." He said, "My first car was a 65 Shelby Mustang GT350. He says, "I have to come over to your house now." And I said, "Well, you can follow us to our house." So we get in the garage, and again he says, "Oh my God." He said, "A Shelby Mustang." He said, "The same color as my old car." And said, Tad looks it over and says, "I want to buy your car." And I said, "It's not for sale." And he said, "Everything's for sale." And I said, "No." And he doesn't know what to say. So then he looks at my other car on the left, 6 feet up in the air, and it's a Cobra. And he didn't know what it was, but he said, "Would you please lower it down so I can look at it?" So I got it down, and then he looks at it and he says, "Oh my God." He stared at it for the longest time, and I was almost going to have to mop the floor because of drippings out of his mouth. "I'm buying this car," I told him. "I've been on the fence about selling it, and we're going to make a deal tonight," he says. We shook hands on it, and Mike says, "I'll get you the check tomorrow when you get off, and I'll meet you at your home." I didn't know what to think, and I don't know about you, but no one sells a car that easy to anyone. So I was not taking this serious. So the next day rolls around, I'm coming back from work, and I roll around the corner, and this guy Mike is sitting in the front yard, rolling around, walking around his car, and impatient. And my wife says, "Do you think this guy Mike is serious about this?" And I go, "He's full of BS." So anyways, we got around to the car, and I told my wife, "You know, this guy's a nutbag." I says, "I can't believe he's going to buy this." So we end up making a deal, and I prayed that the check was going to clear. And that's when our relationship started. So after that, I retired, and Mike wanted me to take care of his whole car collection. If I only knew what I was getting into. Mike is very complicated. As Guy Webster put it, he was a hard nut to crack. And speaking of Guy, at one time Mike and Guy shared the same building. So one day at the shop, Tag and I were looking out at the Topa Mountains in our chairs, looking at the race cars and see which ones we were going to start today. And then Tag looks at me and he says, "What's that noise?" And I said, "It's Guy playing the flute, walking around looking at his bikes." Now I'm going to have to keep this clean. Then Mike tells me I said, well, you're not going to believe this. He's walking around in a kilt also. And Mike says, oh my God. So guy walks up to us and plays something terrible. So Mike blows up and he says, what kind of F plays a flute and walks around in a kilt in a shop? And guy looks at him and is cool as ice and looks at Tag. Why do you have to be so mean? And then he turns around and continues playing his flute as he goes back to his desk. I wanted to crawl under a rock, but they had a special relationship and they said things to each other like they were brothers. So each year passed, Mike would always need more and more help. And I had many hats. I was a plumber, I was an electrician, I was a financial advisor, I was a psychiatrist, and of course, making decisions on cars and bikes. He was like a father to me, and we talked about everything, and we talked about everything. He was a master of all masters in the department of talking. It was weird. We did not agree on sports teams, religion, politics, and we really agreed that we really would go after our own viewpoints, and we would actually agree to disagree. And we respected each other's view. But the one thing we always agreed on was the need for speed. There is not enough time here today to tell you the crazy stories that I could tell you, but I would have to write a book. But one thing he cared about most was his family. He would do anything to help them. I have always liked that, and Mike was a giver. When he asked for help, I never said no. And I know I am blessed that we had each other in our lives. I was so lucky to have talked to him 2 days before he passed away. I was asking him, how are you doing? And are you comfortable? And he was having a hard time talking. All he wanted to do was talk about cars in his garage. How fitting about Mike.
Mike Taggart, he was such a magnanimous guy, and so was a wonderful raconteur, and so good to everybody. He always had time to talk to you and always had something good to say. There are just very few people when you go through life. I'll be 86 next month, and there are very few people you meet like him. I remember one very short story. I went down to down where he had his cars one day, and I looked in there and I said, Mike, you just sent 18 of these motorcycles to Meekum to sell them, and I'm looking out here, and you got 4 of them left. What the hell's going on? He said, I'll tell you what. He says, when I sold those motorcycles for sale, I had to buy them back at more than they were worth, but they can't pronounce the name of Italian motorcycle. I'm buying it back.
I met him in around 1967 when he came to Ojai, and we played mixed doubles together. He was always a gentleman. He never lost his temper, and partly because we won most of the time. But anyway, I have volunteered for 75 years at the Ojai. I played in the Ojai. But, I'm surprised somebody didn't tell this car story, which I'm sure many of you heard. He had his cars in his front yard for a long time, and the rats got into him and ate the wires. So he went out and shot his car and wrecked his car. I think it was a $250,000 Lamborghini. But I just wanted to mention that he was always a gentleman when I knew him. He was much younger.
Much younger.
I first met Mike, who I'm going to call Tag from now on, back in the early to mid 1970s. Our paths crossed several times. For a while I worked at the Oaks Hotel when Mike was living in the back bungalow on the corner of Matilaha and Ventura Streets. Not sure how long he lived there, but it seemed like he was always there. Later I was a waiter at La Plaza Mexican Restaurant on South Montgomery Street. And Mike became one of our best customers. He'd come in 3 to 4 times a week, very late, just before closing, sit at the table by the fireplace, and basically all he wanted was some of Babe and Ted's salsa. He just loved that stuff. He'd ask for 2 little dishes of it, and he'd get a basket of chips. And before you knew it, half of it was on the tablecloth, half of it was in his beard. But he was enjoying the hell out of himself, and we really enjoyed that, and we always enjoyed having him there. But my story that I want to relate has to do with his generosity. And this happened in the 1980s. I don't remember exactly when. There was somebody, whether it was the Racket Club or in those days, the Ojai Valley Tennis Club had a players division. Bill Huffman and Paul Rogers were the first leaders of that when I first joined, and we would always play down here at Libbey Park. And in later years, other people took it over, and once, maybe twice a year, they would throw a big party down at the women's club. So one of these places is going to have a big 60s party. So we were up on the deck at the club one afternoon, and I started whining, God, what the hell am I going to wear to this thing? I don't have anything from the blah, blah, blah. And Mike goes, and Mike was never one to drop names. He goes, well, George, I've got a pair of leather pants that Jim Morrison used to wear. And I was a huge Doors fan. In high school, I had all their records, played them all the time, and I'm thinking, holy shit, man, I just hit the gold mine here. And you're gonna let me borrow those? He goes, yeah, just come over and get them. So a night or two later, I knock on his door. He goes, come on in, George. He's got motorcycles parked all over his living room, a couple on the entrance to his kitchen. And I'm going down the hallway, and he's got pictures lining the hallway. And one of them, if you picture that, with a big black bushy beard, longer hair, no headband, can't see much of his actual face. I go, Mike, what do you got a portrait of Che Guevara up here for? He goes, that's me. 1960 such and such. I go, whoa, your family must have loved you then. He goes, well, I was the black sheep of the family. Anyway, he brings these pants out, and I try them on, and I go, oh my God, they fit, blah, blah, blah. I start walking around, and they're about 6 to 8 inches up below my calf. So I go, I can't wear these things, they're way too short. So I don't want to take them off, so I keep walking around his living room. He comes back out of the shirt, he goes, how about this? And it's a kind of a velvety, paisley, very colored, long sleeve, V-neck, very 60s type shirt. I go, Mike, thank you very much. So I did wear that, but thanks to him, I can still, to this day, even though it wasn't a very long time, I wore Jim Morrison's pants. Unbelievable. And just before I go, there's one other thing I'd like to say in regards to Mike's foot faulting, which, if he was still here with us to this day, he would ever deny having done. And there was a player at the Racket Club, very good player, but he's also a amateur photographer, Mr. Paul Ryan Del Nero, I believe it was up on the top deck, and in his telephoto lens, he took a picture, and he blew it up poster size and hung it on the wall just outside the back door of the Racket Club. And it shows Mike almost to the service line hitting the ball. So, and even to then, with that poster there, that's not a footfall. He denied ever having made a footfall in his life. So that was Mike. Yeah, a hop, skip, and a jump. Yep. And then he hit the ball. So anyway, Mike was a great guy, and we will forever miss him.
Thanks, George.
Tag and Ken were ahead 5-2, and Torek and I came back and won the set. So you can imagine how Tag felt. At first it was the racket up in the tree.
There was an oak tree over there that's no longer there.
Yeah, it hung over a court too, pretty bad. And then the headband went up in the tree, and then the wristband went up in the tree.
And we were cheering him on.
And then the shorts came down, and the shorts came down. And he was wearing the same pair of underpants that were described earlier with the big rips. It's a true story.
It was a rather Homeric moment. And we were there.
These guys were all young whippersnappers when I was playing with Tag. I met him when he looked like that in 1960.
Yeah, a lot of the stories about Tag, you don't really have to tell. You can just say Jim Morrison's pants, you could say ripped underwear, you could say Birkenstocks, and everybody's going to laugh because they all remember all the stories. But I'll just recall the first time I met Tag, I was a whippersnapper. All these guys were already established. Taggart was one of the old crew here. I guess he'd been away for a while, and myself and Billy White had come down here, and we thought maybe we should play tennis. And we saw Dennis Jinks playing, we saw Patrick Murphy playing, we saw Vinny Kablayan playing, and we said, hey, if those guys can play, we can do this too. So we started playing tennis, and Tag, I guess, had moved back. So I'd just been here a few weeks or something playing tennis, and all of a sudden Tag comes down. We weren't aware of his tennis royalty, so we didn't treat him with the proper reverence that he was due. So the first thing that happened was he wanted to get on our court, and we're going, what are you doing? No, this is our court. Second thing, my dog and his dog, that big fat dog he had, I'm sure many of you know that's the name, but I can't remember his name. It was really a huge dog. Anyways, my dog got in a fight with his, and that just set Tag off, and that's when I got to know him. He came up to me, and he said, and he spoke perfect English before this, but after the dogs fight, it was something like this: I'll kill you if your dog bites my dog. Whoa, who is this guy? Well, to make a long story short, he didn't kill me, and our friendship blossomed, and he became pretty much a mentor for me, and he gave me some sage advice that I still take to this day. And I'm just honored to know him, and really to be part of all this down here at Ojai. We had such a good time, and it was such a great tennis era, and I feel really lucky and blessed to be part of it. So,
Good job, Robbie. Good job, Robbie.
I live in Austin, Texas. There's a lot of family that couldn't be here today. And I'm going to change it up. We've had so many amazing stories from the local Ojai community and the tennis community. He talked to me about it a lot. But I just want to tell you a little bit about another side of him real quick. So Michael was one of my favorite human in the world. And I was with him a few days before he passed, and he couldn't talk, as we've heard. He had lost that ability, and I said, Michael, you're one of my favorite fucking humans. And he said, ooh, I like that. So I've known Michael for over 40 years. I don't want to say how long. I'm going to give myself away. And Michael and I were super, super close. And I came to visit him a couple times in Ojai. And of course, you know what he said to me. Oh, I can't believe you'd come all this way to see an old man. He said, nobody ever comes to visit me here. None of the family ever comes to see me. You're the only one, which I knew was total bullshit. And
how you know you're appreciated.
Yeah, that's right, exactly. So, I was kind of a crazy teenager, a kind of a delinquent, crazy punk rock girl getting in a lot of trouble. And my family didn't really think so much of me, except for Michael. And he appreciated me and saw me for who I really am before anybody else in the family. And he said, you know what, you're a badass. And, I love old cars and old boats, and we always talked about that, and I'm always like, man, Michael, one of these days I'm gonna get me one of those wooden boats. And he said, oh yeah? Well, if you had one of those boats, what would you do? And I said, well, I'd wear a big hat and bright red lipstick, and I'd drive it real fast. And he was like, yeah, that's my girl. I wouldn't expect anything less. So I know Michael mostly from Michigan. I think some of you know he spent a lot of time on this lake called Higgins Lake, where our family has been spending time since the late 1800s. He loved Higgins Lake, as he loved Ojai, as he loved tennis, as he loved all of you, all of us, so much. Michael was I wanted to just talk a little bit about that Michael was hilarious, a storyteller. He's the only person I know that can talk story me under the table. People who know me know that I go on and on. Probably get it from him. So he loved Higgins Lake. He was a little obsessed with Higgins Lake. And he knew more about Higgins Lake than anyone I've ever met. Most of it was true or based in some kind of truth, I'm sure. And there were things buried on the bottom of the lake. Anchors, remnants of anchors, sunken boats. And my first memory of Michael, I was a tiny kid, and we were out in a rowboat. pre-money. Little rowboat, the putt-putt, his sister's boat, I believe. And I'm pretty sure I was with Mike Jr., some other kids. And he was taking us out at dusk to look for the sunken anchor, the one he was tied to by his brothers as a child. Right. So, and left there for hours, right?
He claims overnight.
Overnight. Wow. So he takes us out. We have our flashlights. It's dusk, and he's like, "All right, everybody, get ready." And we're all like, I must have been like 7 or something. And he's like, "Look around, any moment now, and then any place." Oh my God! There it is! And we were like, "Ah!" We all screamed at this cement block with a chain on it under the water. Only Michael could make something that dramatic, so beautiful and so mythical. So for the rest of my life, thanks a lot. I have a total phobia of anchors and an obsession. Thanks, Mike. But Michael did that to me. He gave me mythology, an appreciation for beauty, poetry. I'm a long-winded storyteller. Michael to me was not only a character, super difficult, super hilarious, totally unpredictable, totally lovable, but also someone who loved beauty and someone who was actually a very sensitive, shy, believe it or not, and a romantic, And even when he'd be cursing and joking, all these stories we have, he looked at the world romantically, right? And we love him for that.
I was conned into playing strip tennis here with one of our all-time characters, Randy Russell. Everybody knows him. And he lost points on purpose to make me take my clothes off. I finally got down to my underwear, and we lost that point, so I threw it up in a tree, and his wife has made a painting of that tree with my underwear in it.